Alright, how's it going? So, I'm finally doing another vocal tutorial. It's been a really long time coming. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. And I've not done a video like this since like 2013, I think was the last time I did a vocal tutorial. And, you know, it was pretty popular. Quite a lot of people seem to like it. It's a little bit outdated now. I mean, there's still good information in there. And what I'm saying in that video is still valid. And I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that I said in that video in this video, but I'm hoping to try and break things down a little bit more. I've got a few more years of experience in doing this now since that video, but just as a disclaimer, I'm not a vocal coach. I'm not like a vocal teacher. I'm not qualified in any way, but I've been doing vocals like this for 11 years now. I'm 26 and I started this back when I was 15. And I would say my vocals haven't really changed or deteriorated at all over the years of doing this. So take that as you will. I'm not like qualified, like I said. I'm not going to go into super detailed or technical stuff. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what works for me, what I do to this day for my vocals. And yeah, I'm going to try and cover as much as I can in this video without rambling on too much. I may cut certain parts of the video out if I feel like I'm rambling too much, but I've got notes over here, so if you see me looking down this way, it's because I've got notes on my monitor and I'm just kind of looking over at them so that I kind of stay on track. So the type of vocal technique that I'm going to be teaching is false chord. That's the technique I use. I don't do any fry screaming or anything like that, so I'm not going to be teaching any of that in this video. If you're wanting to learn fry screams or you have any questions about fry screaming, unfortunately, I'm not the guy to ask because I don't know much about fry screaming. I could never figure it out myself, and I didn't spend much time trying to because my false chord technique worked pretty well for me and still does. So the first kind of section of this video I'm going to talk about is discovering where that distortion is coming from and how to start building the distortion, that false chord distortion, into an actual scream or into like an actual vocal. But before I talk about that, I want to talk a little bit about kind of pre-vocal prep. So before you start trying to do any vocals or start trying to do any of the kind of distortion stuff I'm about to talk about, there's some things that you might need to do before that. And for me, what I do anytime I'm going to be doing vocals, I drink a cup of tea, like a nice hot cup of tea. It could be anything really. You could drink coffee, fucking hot chocolate, something. Doesn't really matter necessarily, just a nice hot drink. And then after that, I just drink room temperature water, usually just kind of water, bottled water. And it might sound kind of gross to drink room temperature water. A lot of people seem to be kind of put off by that idea, but it's important not to drink anything that's refrigerated, any cold drinks. Avoid drinking anything like that. The main reason being is that it's going to kind of tighten everything up, and if you start trying to do any vocals or messing about with distortion and you've just drank like a cold drink, it's going to feel uncomfortable because everything's all tightened up. So the reason I drink like a hot cup of tea before doing vocals, it's almost like a pre-warm-up thing. So before I actually start doing the warm-up proper, that kind of helps me ease into it a little bit. Anytime I start trying to do vocals without drinking a cup of tea, it almost feels like I have to warm up for longer before I feel like, you know, I'm fully warmed up. So, and the easiest way really to explain how to do this is to talk about the angry sigh. Now, this is kind of it's pretty much the most common way people teach this. And I think it's just because it's easy to explain and it's easy for people to figure it out. So essentially the angry sigh is just doing a sigh, like a like an audible sigh, but adding a bit more kind of oomph to it, right? And it's kind of called the angry sigh, and it sounds like this. Right? And you should feel this kind of vibration. Don't tighten anything up. Don't try and force the air out. You're really just like you're doing a sigh. Like you've just been asked to do something you don't want to do, and you're like, right? That's the distortion. Another thing you can kind of try and visualize is like the Christian Bale Batman voice, right? Where's Rachel? Right? That's the false chord distortion that we're looking for. And don't try and force it, like I said. Don't try and like make it loud. Don't try and like do anything with it. Just try and get that kind of grumbly sound. It shouldn't hurt, shouldn't be uncomfortable in any way, assuming you've drank plenty of water and if you've had a cup of tea or something beforehand. Doing this should come pretty easy. Another thing you can think about, and this was kind of an analogy that I gave in the last vocal tutorial. Imagine you're trying to like steam up a window. So you get this window, the way you would kind of breathe out to steam up a window, right? That's the way you want the air coming out when you do this. And then you kind of combine that with the false chord angry sigh Batman voice thing, right? That's basically the false chord distortion that you want to grasp. However, there's something I need to kind of warn you of. There's another type of technique that you can end up doing this way by doing the angry sigh, and that is the Cookie Monster voice. And that is not using your false chords, but it might feel and sounds very similar to how it feels and sounds when you're doing the false chord angry sigh, right? So the Cookie Monster would be like this. Cookie, right? That, you can almost do that the same way if you're trying to do the angry sigh. It comes out kind of similar, but it's using a lot more of your own voice, and the air doesn't really come out as freely. You're almost compressing the air a bit more, but that is wrong. And if you're doing that, you need to kind of correct that. You need to kind of go back a step. Try first just getting air out, like right? You need to kind of build up to the false chord thing. You probably won't get it first try trying to do the angry sigh. It takes a bit of time to kind of figure out where that is. But once you get that feeling, and once you know that you're using the false chords and the distortion sound right, it doesn't hurt, it's nice and comfortable, nice and relaxed, then you can start moving on to using your diaphragm and things. The easiest way for me to describe using your diaphragm, take a deep breath into your stomach, right? So imagine you're taking your breath through a straw. That's kind of the easiest way to figure this out. So let your stomach inflate, right? Your stomach should kind of inflate, or it feels like it's inflating. And then you want to push that air out and just keep holding and pushing that air out until you feel your stomach almost like compressing and tensing up, right? So that feeling of your stomach muscles kind of contracting, that's you starting to kind of activate your diaphragm to push the air out, because you start to get to that kind of desperate point where you're pushing the air out, where it's like you have no more air to give, right? And your diaphragm has to really push the rest of that air out. It might feel a bit silly, but that's the easiest way I can kind of explain how to utilize and use your diaphragm, right? So these are two different things I've just kind of told you about. So the angry sigh, and then using your diaphragm, just pushing the air out hard for as long as you can. Now you need to try and combine these two things, and this is where you start to really create the false chord vocal, right? So we're taking that angry sigh, and then we're going to use our diaphragm to project it and hold the distortion for as long as we can. Now you won't be able to hold it for very long when you first start, but essentially what you want to be doing is this. Right? So you're just taking that angry sigh, but you're focusing on the distortion part of the sigh and using your diaphragm. Take a deep breath. Take the breath the same way through the straw technique, right? And then you're trying to push the air out, but you're using the angry sigh to create the distortion, but using your diaphragm to kind of push the air out harder and hold the distortion for longer, right? Right? And that's how it's going to really sound. It's not going to sound like much of like it's not going to be this big, powerful scream or anything at this point in time. That's all you're going to really get from it, right? Then you just really have to practice that for a long time. It can take a long time to really start to feel comfortable just doing that little exercise that I demonstrated there. But do that as much as you can, just taking deep breaths, letting your stomach inflate, and then just letting that air out, pushing it out with your stomach, combining it with the angry sigh to get the distortion, and just holding it for as long as you can. Once we start feeling comfortable doing that, you can start to transition it into like a kind of mid scream, right? Like an actual vocal. And essentially how we do that is by getting the distortion, and this is assuming that you've kind of figured out how to do what we were just demonstrating there, and you can do that quite comfortably, and you can start doing it more powerful as well. Like you can start to kind of almost immediately go into right? And just the more and more that you do with your diaphragm, the more powerful it becomes, and we can start to almost get a mid. So essentially the mid is that, but just controlling it more and having more control with your diaphragm, right? Right? It might seem like I've kind of glossed through all that stuff, but everything I've just explained, take as much time as you need to figure all that stuff out. Seriously, take as much time as you need, and don't be discouraged if it's like 2-3 months and you're still like, oh, I'm still trying to get this angry side down. Right? Just keep at it. Keep practicing with your diaphragm as well, because your diaphragm, like, a lot of people don't really use it that much, right? So when you start to utilize it, you might feel like your stomach muscles and like they're gonna start feeling tender, and oh, it feels like I've just done like 15 crunchies. Like that's kind of normal when you first start. Nothing up here should hurt though. You shouldn't feel any pain, tenderness. Your voice should still be fine. You might get a bit of fatigue in your voice. Again, the best way to avoid that is take plenty of breaks. If you're especially when you're quite new at this, you want to take plenty of rest and breaks, and drink plenty of water. Moving on to lows. So essentially we want to take that mid, and we want to transition it to a low. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's exactly the same thing as we're doing, but we're going to change our mouth shape, and we're going to make a kind of O shape, right? O. The mid's more open, whereas the low, we're going to kind of close our mouth, O, make an O shape. And with my lows, I also change my tongue positioning to kind of get the pitch and the tone to kind of really change. And I'll demonstrate it, and then I'll explain it, right? So this would be my mid, and then low. Okay, so how do I get that sound? Very simple. Do the O, like I explained, and then put your tongue up, right? So essentially all you're doing is this. Don't know how well you can see that. You're just putting your tongue up. I look fucking ridiculous, right? But that's essentially what you're doing. You're going O and putting your tongue up at the same time. And you can try and transition from that mid down to the low, but when you first start, that may be kind of hard to do because it's going to take a lot of air to go from your mid down to your low like this. Right? It's gonna take a lot of air just to do that, and a lot of stamina, and you might not be able to do that right away. So the way I kind of recommend figuring out your low is very similar to just how you figured out your mid. You want to do the kind of angry sigh, diaphragm power, but changing the shape of your mouth and putting your tongue up a bit. Right? And you would get kind of something like that. So it's kind of just the same way you figured out. You're just doing that, but changing the shape of your mouth. Right? If you're not getting much of a drop in pitch, again, this could be the Cookie Monster thing coming in again, because I spend some time on the Screaming subreddit, where people kind of ask for advice and they post videos of themselves doing this sort of stuff. And sometimes I see people saying, you know, am I doing false chord right? And they're kind of doing something like this. That is the Cookie Monster, right? But they're trying to, they're trying to change their mouth positioning, but you're not getting the pitch change. So if your pitch isn't really changing just by changing your mouth and tongue positioning, it might be because you're not utilizing your false chords. You're not using your false chords properly, right? So just again, I'm just kind of putting that out there as a warning, because it's the most common mistake I see when people are trying to learn false chord. They're not actually using their false chords, and they're using, like, you know, the Cookie Monster. The Cookie Monster thing is uncomfortable. Every time I do it, I'm like, that doesn't feel good. So try and avoid that. Highs, I get the most questions about how I do my highs, but it's just false chord highs. And how I learned how to do my highs was take my mid, right? Mid, and then just pushing it up and opening my mouth up, right? So we go from, like, saying mid is more like mad, and then just kind of opening it up. And I'm not tightening my throat, I'm not doing anything like that. I'm just taking the mid, opening my mouth up, and kind of, the distortion almost kind of moves up in your throat, right? I think the main thing, your larynx, which is like your Adam's apple, right? That does actually kind of raise up a little bit. But something that I do is I actually look up slightly when I do highs. Excuse me. And I don't know if that's because it helps my larynx move up, or if it just causes, like, you know, something to make it easier. But that's what I do. I kind of look up a little bit, and I take that mid, and I just kind of raise it up a little bit. And this is the way that I recommend for people to kind of figure out their highs. Don't immediately just start kind of going like, because that's you're going to fuck yourself up, right? You don't want to immediately start doing that. Take your mid and start working up with it, right? Right? Just working up and up. I'm kind of taking a step back because I like to look up. I like to put my chin up a bit. It helps me do my highs. But that's how you want to build up to your highs. You don't want to just immediately try and jump onto them. You want to get your mid and just kind of work up like that. That's kind of what you're doing, but using your false chord, right? Don't try and, like, deliberately make it higher pitched or try and make it screechy or anything. I know everybody wants to have, like, super sick high pitched highs, but it takes a long time to really figure out how to get them to that point, right? And you got to just keep at it, just keep practicing, right? And then it will be second nature to you, the same as just low, mid, high, right? You will eventually have enough, like, muscle memory that you can just do it off the cuff. But it takes a long time of practicing, and it's very similar, kind of practicing your lows and your mids, practicing the distortion, practicing using your diaphragm. It's all just time based. That's really all it is. You know, I can tell you kind of how I figured it out and try and break it down to make it easier for other people to figure out, but you have to put in the time to do it, right? That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. This isn't like a, you know, you're not going to walk away from this video having solid vocals, right? It's going to take time. False chord especially seems to be kind of tricky for people to pick up on. People, when they first start doing false chord, they're like, oh, I can do, like, lows and mids, no problem, but I can't do highs. Highs are the tricky part of false chord. It takes the longest time to figure out, and it took me a really long time. For a long time, my highs kind of sounded more like this, right? It's just kind of higher pitched mid, and that's essentially what they were, right? And that's all they really are now. They're just a higher pitched mid. I'm just taking my mid and kind of pushing it up my throat and having the distortion kind of coming from higher up, and also looking up slightly helps me get them slightly higher pitched as well. I've written here in my notes, this can be frustrating, stick with it. I'm glad I put that in the notes, but I've already kind of said that. It takes time, you have to put in the time, but it might be frustrating. That, like, a lot of this stuff can be really frustrating because you want to sound like your favorite vocalist. Like, my favorite vocalist is still, to this day, Mitch Looker. And I still, you know, listen to The Cleansing and I'm just like, like, I want to sound like that, you know what I mean? But, like I said near the beginning of the video, stay within your range, stay within your comfort zone in a way. I know you are kind of going out of your comfort zone and doing this because you're doing a lot of stuff your body's not used to doing. You're putting your voice under strain that it's not used to. Well, not really putting under strain, but you're doing things your voice is not used to. So it takes time to get used to that. It's the same thing when you start working out at the gym. Your body's not used to that. You got to build up to it. You got to practice, and the more time you spend at it, the easier it gets. But anyway, yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I will answer pretty much every question that I get. I also frequent on the Screaming subreddit, so if there's anybody that's came from there, hey, how's it going? And yeah, until the next video I make, I'll see you guys in that video. See you later. I don't know, I've switched the camera off and I'm still fucking about. Alright.